Buenos dias, tuberistas. So, Iran developing nuclear weapons, or at least weapons capability, is the newest outrage in the global order which world opinion must confront. And by world opinion is meant only those who matter in the new world order, just like society means only those who matter domestically, namely, those with money and the right connections. In this case, the USA, Israel, and the Atlantic powers. What China, Russia, India, Brazil, Pakistan, or others across the ghetto tracks think of it is irrelevant, of course. Now, I'm not for nuclear proliferation, even if, for the sake of argument, there's a case that nuclear WMDs prevented World War III by making it too terrible to actually fight. The more these things accumulate in different hands, the more the likelihood they'll be used, somehow, somewhere, by someone for some bullshit irrationale. We've seen twice in the past quarter century what devastation an accidental discharge of nuclear fallout can wreak. The intentional carnage will be more than collateral, it'll be total. That said, we live in a world where the dominant nuclear power, the US and A, glories in its saber-rattling prowess like an old-time cavalier looking for fights to pick to assert his nobility. In such a world, it becomes unfortunately logical to arm oneself against such predatory behavior. Why shouldn't Iran seek nuclear protection from the superpower that subverted its internal affairs more than once to get at its resources, and seeks to do so again? Why shouldn't it arm itself against the regional nuclear power, the little bully nephew with a chip on his shoulder, Israel, out to prove he can kick ass just like Uncle Sam, making sure, of course, that Uncle Sammy's not too far away in case some real shit goes down. As for guarantees of peace if Iran will dismantle its nuclear program, I believe Muammar Gaddafi's fate and the fate of Saddam Hussein are object lessons to any would-be developer or proliferator of weapons of mass destruction. You can't trust the West. Gaddafi laid down his arms, shaking hands with the West quite literally, as we see from the journalistic record, thinking bygones were bygones and he could get on with business. That's what Indians get for smoking peace pipe with fork-tongued paleface. No sooner was there the opportunity than Gaddafi was assassinated, set up by Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Sarkozy and the whole NATO Star Chamber, letting their little mercenary Libyan wolf pack finish him off and take his blood on their jaws. Same with old Saddam. He plays good boy, disbands his WMDs to save his ass, and as soon as he bends over and touches his toes to show the goat eye and how clean it is, W slips right in. Again, making sure local lackeys do the actual executing, while Caesar in D.C. plays pilot and washes his hands, with Christopher Hitchens sitting beside him at the imperial table, gloating in his chablis. So, after this example of honor by the global community, why should Iran, North Korea, the remaining partners in the axis of evil, trust Washington? Who's behaving like the global jihadist? Who has actually used fissionable weapons of mass destruction in war, only to save lives, of course? Rogue proliferators, that is, someone you wouldn't allow in your country club for cocktails and golf, have every incentive to double their efforts at parity, claiming self-defense, with the U.S. ratcheting up the election year tough talk, and Israel threatening to start a war, just to drag the U.S. in, so as to give it no other choice to save Israel from annihilation, no matter who started what. After all, do we trust Washington? Do we trust the State Department, the Pentagon, Congress, the White House, and any of the professional career liars who stink up their places? Do we trust them at home, sipping their cocktails out on the links? No, we the people right here surely do not. So why should those people away over yonder? No logical correlation I see. Another reason this is such despicable, but usual standard hypocrisy, is not just because the U.S. set up the Islamic Revolution in Iran, making it possible by overthrowing Iran's one Western-style democratic premier in the 20th century, Mohammad Mossadegh, with a CIA-paid rent-a-crowd because he threatened to nationalize the Anglo-Persian Oil Company and put the Shah back on the throne to torture his people for the next quarter century, is not just because the U.S. was trying to instigate the same thing just a few years ago, interfering in Iran's internal affairs just like a Koch brothers tea party back home. No, it's even worse. It's because the U.S. initiated the Iranian nuclear program in the get-go. That's right, back when the Shah was the major Gulf recipient of the American military-industrial complex, paying top petrodollars for U.S. war toys, going on gratuitous shopping sprees so that he didn't know where to put the stuff while his servants went as hungry and cold and diseased as Apple employees in China. In 1967, nuclear cooperation was initiated in an Atoms for Peace program, when the Tehran Nuclear Research Center was established and the United States supplied a 5-megawatt reactor filled with highly enriched uranium. This is public record, no great secret here. Germany signed in to help him too, and by 1975 the Bushehr plant would be up and running. Iran was allowed to buy the Swedish shares of a multi-partner uranium enrichment facility in France. South Africa, another bastion of Western civilization and friend of Israel, was furnishing the Shah uranium in exchange for nuclear enrichment technology. When Dick Cheney was U.S. Secretary of State and Donald Rumsfeld as Secretary of Defense under Gerald Ford, in 1976, Iran was given the opportunity to purchase a plutonium plant for developing the full nuclear cycle. The motive here was to enable Iran to use nuclear power for its domestic needs and save its petroleum for export. Exactly the same rhetoric Iran uses now. Believable? Maybe not. But no less than the Shah, and if Ahmadinejad's a liar, then he's no less a fork-tongued backstabber than the other unworthies I won't mention again. Here's a full-page ad that ran in several U.S. publications of the period. Okay? Now it says nothing about weapons. But the U.S. and its allies subsidizing the civilian development knew there was the risk of Iran transforming this nuclear capacity into weapons capability and proliferation, as the CIA assessed in its own 1974 report. First, I'll read you what this says, in case you didn't see it, which is likely. Guess who's building nuclear power plants? The Shah of Iran is sitting on top of one of the largest reservoirs of oil in the world. Yet he's building 2 nuclear plants and planning 2 more to provide electricity for his country. He knows the oil is running out, and time with it. But he wouldn't build the plants now if he doubted their safety. He'd wait, as many Americans want to do. The Shah knows that nuclear energy is not only economical, it has enjoyed a remarkable 30-year safety record, a record that was good enough for the citizens of Plymouth, Massachusetts, too. They've approved their second nuclear plant by a vote of almost 4-1, which shows you don't have to go as far as Iran for an endorsement of nuclear power. Nuclear energy, today's answer. Now, as for the CIA 1974 report, it states, if the Shah continues in power into the 1980s, and India has proceeded with weapons development, we have no doubt Iran will follow suit. So, what to do? If you're serious about peace, and neither the U.S. nor Israel is so serious about peace, they want a war, believe me, as a showdown with Iran is the ultimate Middle East endgame. That's why the U.S. set up Occupation House, flanking both neighbors of Iran. But to those who are serious about peace, the first step is agreeing to talk with Iran about arms control. The rhetoric now offered is designed solely for aggression, peace being off the table. There has to be concession from the Western side. Israel doesn't want this because it's afraid that concessions mean selling out Israel. But let's leave Israel out of it and focus on what's best for peace and justice, both of which definitions do not include the name of said country. Let's assume for the sake of argument that Iran is already a nuclear power, and treated as such, not rattling sabers to justify its own nuclear arms race, as was done with the USSR after 1948. Iran has areas of mutual interest with the West, such as reining in jihadists in the Middle East. Because, believe it or not, Iran is a much more rational country than Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. Iran has not exported nearly the same amount of freelance terrorists that those 2 allies have done. Iran today is content to tend its roses and mend its fences. But the U.S. seems hell-bent on creating enemies anew in Iran, Pakistan, and now Syria. The crusading cavalier wants another battle. If war comes, it will be the fault of Hillary Clinton and her counterpart in Jerusalem, if the 2013 military budget, at least the military aspect of it, goes through. Let's hope for the sake of peace, of humanity, of justice, of love for life, that the Pentagon is paired to the skivvies. Can knock upon the phone. Hello, General Georges Patton. Yeah, you're afraid the 2013 military budget cuts going through too, but oh, you beat General Pinochet pinochle. But Hitler's a tougher nut to crack. Well, what's up besides other men's nuts? A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. That's why we need to attack Iran now before they can hurt us back. But isn't it cowardly to attack those that can't retaliate? Oh, that's when you do attack. No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country, but by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. I reckon that applies to bitches too. Right, Hillary?